Today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show, everyone's pretty excited over a reduction in 0.5% of the income tax, reducing it down another half a percentage point. People are pretty excited about it, but should we be? What does it mean? Why is this actually something that speaks to just how unconservative our legislature is, how big government they are? We'll have that. Plus, of course, Beshear's reaction to it. On top of that, Ford has scrapped any plans to build an electric SUV for the time being. That, on top of another policy, points to the fact that perhaps Ford won't be building as many electric vehicles into the future. What does that mean for that big bet that the legislature placed on that Ford battery plant? We'll go over that. And then finally, we'll use an example of a comment I had on Twitter to point to how people just keep getting away with this. How do the legislators, how does Beshear, how do they keep getting reelected? And then finally, turning a little bit to the national side of things, we'll talk about the situation regarding Tim Walz's son. Interesting point, just real quick, I have to make on that. So we're going to have all that and more today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. For those of you tuning in for the first time, I thank you. Please make sure you subscribe. If you're listening to this on a podcast format, please make sure you go ahead and leave a review if you're able to do so on your wherever you're listening. I know Apple and Spotify allow you to go ahead and do that. Do appreciate that. Yesterday, we were totally going to have a show. In fact, we were going to have a show about exactly what I'm talking about today. But what ended up happening is that the recording got a little messed up, a little confused. And, by the time I would have had to have re-recorded it, got edited and posted, it would have been like 5, 6 o'clock. And I'm sure many of you, wouldn't have had a chance to listen to that between the new episode today. So that's why we didn't have a show yesterday. But we will get better into the future, I promise, and make sure we pump out that show 5 days a week. Because I know I get messages every time one doesn't post like, hey, what are you doing? Are we going to have a show tomorrow? What's the deal? So I apologize. But also, if you want to reach out to the show, go ahead and email info@theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's info@theandrewshow.com. Go ahead and you can also reach out to the show by heading over to theandrewshow.com, hitting the contact tab. That's theandrewshow.com. And that's the best way, too. If you want to share the show with others, tell them head over to theandrewshow.com, hit the Listen Now tab, and they can see all the different places that they can listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. But without further ado, let's dig down into it. So you've probably seen the headlines. A lot of people excited over a half a percentage point reduction in our income tax on the legislature's quest to reduce down our income tax to zero. Now, let me be very clear as I'm digging down into this. I want our income tax to be zero. I think our income tax should be zero. I find income tax to be immoral. It's the most immoral tax I think we have, probably followed up by a property tax especially a property tax that raises on unrealized gains. But I find an income tax particularly immoral because what it says is before you get to feed your family, before you put a roof over your head, before you literally do any of the things necessary for you and your family to live, the government gets to come in and take their vig. They get a percentage of what you make. Never mind your bills. They don't care. They get a percentage of what you make. And it's also a cautionary tale. A tale that will come up later on as we're discussing through this about talking about how do bad taxing policies, how does the government keep raising taxes on us? Because the tale deals with income tax when it was first put in place. Remember, it was unconstitutional. Remember, like any of you were alive, but when it passed. But anyways, it was unconstitutional as understood by our Supreme Court in order to tax income. That was not allowed according to our Constitution. So in order to allow an income tax, an entire constitutional amendment had to have been passed. And so you may be wondering, like, how did everyone agree to being taxed more, especially on their income? How was that sold? And while none of us were alive back in the early 1900s when this happened, what we do know is that it started out and was promised as just a tax on some of the most wealthiest people there were. And now, as you know, it has now extended to where we all pay the tax. Everybody pays it. No matter who you are, your income level, you pay it. Now, some people may get a lot more services back than they pay in taxes, but everybody pays the tax, period. That's what we now obviously know. But how did that happen? Well, we can look at what happened in Kentucky and look at everybody celebrating this half percentage cut to explain to us exactly how citizens are duped, tricked, allow themselves to be taxed more and more, because this is what occurred, to understand. So back in 2022, the legislature passed a bill that would stair-step down the reduction in income tax as long as the general fund still hit certain levels. And because the income tax, the sales tax, and a lot of other taxes all get piled into that general fund. Now keep in mind, as I'm talking about this, because I'm going to go into inflation numbers, that food is not sales tax, and fuel tax, the tax on gas, does not go into the general fund. So when I start talking about receipts and inflations, and I made a post on social media where I was talking about some of the numbers, and somebody made a comment about how, well, you're using the CPI inflation index, and a lot of things are taken out of it. And a lot of those things they take out of it is things like food and fuel. But food and fuel aren't in the general fund anyway. So we're pretty safe in our discussion here, okay? So let's go over exactly what happened. So the legislature comes in and decides that they want to move away from having an income tax. A lot of states that are doing pretty well financially don't have income taxes. It's a thing that really attracts people in. Some states don't have really any property tax, or a whole lot less. Thinking of Texas, that is doing pretty well as well. So our legislature is saying, well, we want to adopt those same taxation policies, but they didn't decide that they needed to go ahead and at least they couldn't spend more than what they were already spending. They said, we're not going to cut our spending. They didn't say we're going to keep our spending levels the same. What they did is they took our sales tax and they expanded out the categories that they tax on. They didn't increase our sales tax, but they started taxing on a lot of business-to-business services, such as marketing, financial planning they started taxing, massage they started taxing, rideshare programs they started taxing. Basically, they started sales tax in all these different categories. But the idea is that, well, we will sales tax in more categories, but we'll be able to take away the income tax. And if it was an even swap, I wouldn't be very critical of it. But it wasn't an even swap. In fact, the plan didn't require the government to spend less. The plan, as set out, literally required the government to spend more money than it was currently. They didn't say, let's lock in spending levels and adjust it to inflation. And then every time we bring in more money in our receipts than what we did priorly, adjusted for inflation, well, as long as we at least cover whatever income tax cut we can cover with that money, we're going to cut it. Now, if they did that, I'd be applauding, I'd be clapping, I'd be very, very ecstatic. I wouldn't have any complaints. But they didn't. And the net result, the reason why you're getting a 0.5 percentage point tax cut is because your taxes went up overall about 5%, over 5% over the last several years. Okay, here's the real numbers for you. So in fiscal year 21, the general fund brought in $12.8 billion. Now, if we were to go ahead and adjust that for inflation, that is $14.75 billion in today's money. So you'd say, okay, so the general fund should be bringing in $14.75 billion, and then that would be an even tax burden on the citizens overall. But instead, our general fund in fiscal year 24 brought in $15.57 billion, over $800 million more over 5% more than what they were pulling into the general fund when this bill first passed. So it wasn't a tax decrease. It was a 5% tax increase. Because our population didn't go up 5%. Our unemployment didn't drop. Actually, it's gone up 0.1% since then. Our workforce participation rate has only gone up 0.3% since then. Wage growth hasn't kept up with inflation. So in real wage growth, it's actually gone down. The state can't print more money. So the only way that they brought in, adjusted for inflation, more than 5% more into that general fund is because you are paying more for taxes. It's because you are digging more into your pocket, 5% more into your pocket, to give more money to the state. At a time where it's already so difficult to pay for everything. And this is how things like our income tax first passed. Because, and this is one that I think, in my opinion, one of the greatest cons that our legislature ever pulled off was by convincing all of you, maybe not you guys listen to the podcast here, but the citizens, rest of the citizens of Kentucky, by convincing all of them to clap and applaud for a tax increase. It disgusts me. Every time I'm at a Lincoln Day dinner, every time I'm at a party meeting, every time I'm somewhere hearing political speeches, and I hear a legislator get up and talk about how they lowered your income tax, and then all the SEALs in the room, well-trained SEALs, sit there clapping for them getting a tax increase. The same people who said they have the political philosophy of lower taxes, lower government spending, are clapping for it. They don't take a look around and wonder, we have all this money coming into the government. They don't ask a question of why has our budget not gone down with Republicans in power. They don't ask it. I wonder how legislators get away with things. These past few days, I was posting about a past week or so, and people listen to the show. No, I was posting and making shows about the out-of-control contracts that our so-called Republican legislature had approved just within the past month, and who the money was going to. And I post about those on socials, and somebody commented, and it really tells us how our government got here, how our problems got here, and why they will continue unless we make a change. And this was the comment. They said, Stephen Meredith and Bobby McCool should know better. They're talking about a contract. I should clarify that. They're talking on a post I made about a contract. The contract we're giving money to Attorney General Merrick Garland's son-in-law's company in order to teach DEI concepts in schools. Called it out. Factual. So a person commented, I'm not trying to call them out per se, they're probably a good Republican individual, but it just points to why this continues. So here's this person's comment. They said, Steve Meredith and Bobby McCool should know better. They must not have been given all the information. Donald Douglas is pretty reasonable as well. Usually, we need more information to understand the issue. So what they're claiming is, those are all legislators that are on this contract review committee. And the claim by this individual leaving the comment is that, well, the legislators must have been duped. They must not have all the information because, when I call and talk to them, when I talk to them at events or when I bring up issues to them or we communicate or we look at what bills they propose, not what they actually passed and what the net effect of what they passed is. Keep that in mind. But when I talk to them, they say and they do the right things. So this must have been, they were duped. They were just, Bashir just tricked them into clearing this contract. They must have not had all the information. Now, that begs the question of why is it that a radio show, TV show host, and podcaster who is not paid to dig through the contract review committee's meeting materials and contracts and research them. No, that's what the legislators in the oversight position are paid to do. I had no more information than what they have in their meeting materials. All I simply bothered to do was Google who the companies were and read the summaries of the contracts to be able to understand what they were paying them for and how much. I did not have any more information than they had. In fact, they have far more information at their fingertips because they can actually call people into their committees and have them testify. But yet, despite this, the response isn't, okay, they clearly are doing something wrong. And it could be that they don't have the ability to research all these contracts. Well, that would come down to three things. It either come down to the fact that they need more resources, they need more people dedicated to that committee researching the contracts. It could mean that they need more help from the citizenry and also looking through the contracts if the legislature doesn't want to give it to them. Or it could mean that they're too lazy / don't have the time to be able to dig through each and every single one of these contracts. And if that's the case, they shouldn't be on the committee if they can't do that. But in all three cases, it doesn't require them to be silent. If they're a good legislator, if there's somebody who actually cares and believes in this, what it requires them to do is get off their butts and say something and do something. Either get off your butt and make it very public that you're calling on leadership in the Senate and in the House to provide more resources to this committee. Or make it a very public statement that you have been allowing bad contracts to slip through the cracks and you need citizens to go ahead and look through them with you and then post the links where they can find the list of contracts. Or go to leadership and say you can no longer be on the committee. But all of them require you to take action. But instead of saying, wow, what are these people doing that they're missing on? What kind of action are they not doing? This individual making this comment would rather believe that they're being tricked or duped. There's just nothing they can do because, when I talk to them, they seem to be good conservatives. They seem like they care. Well, of course, they pretend to at least. Or maybe they care as much as, they need to care until it becomes inconvenient, hard, or they have to go up against political forces. Sure, they're going to say that to you, but we can't afford to give these people any more opportunities to obfuscate their responsibilities in their positions. And if they can't do it, they need to get out of the committee and hand it off to somebody else. But as long as we keep making excuses for them like this commenter did, they will continue to be able to get away with doing nothing. And worse yet, because you want to believe the best of everything they say, and you'd never want to believe that a Republican legislator who says and does all the right things to your face might actually be bad, because you don't want to believe that. Even when there's evidence to the contrary, well, that's how we end up getting a over 5% increase on taxes. And what's funny is I bring that up, people are like, well, maybe they just need more money. That's a literal something people said. Well, the state just needs more money. They need more for pensions, or they need more for this or that. Well, we got to pay off this or that. And I hear you. But let me ask you this. Would a state that needs more money spend over $500 million on electric battery production for electric vehicles? And that moves us to our next story. Because remember, this same legislature who needed to increase our taxes by over 5% dedicated over $500 million, not in tax incentives. It's not money that they didn't currently have that they're basically saying, okay, we won't tax you for. No. Over $500 million in actual money going out in either cash land, funding for special programs, whatever it may be. They put over $500 million into electric battery production. Because we got plants out in Western Kentucky, we got the Ford plant, we had some other battery plants. I've talked about them on the show, but now we've got the ticking time bomb. This is going to become a real issue for both our legislators and Beshear. And the ticking time bomb here is this. Ford just announced that they're scrapping plans to build an electric SUV. They're going to keep their electric Mustang and their electric truck, Ford Lightning. But they're scrapping plans for an SUV. They may do a hybrid into the future. They don't know. But they announced that they're losing $44,000 a vehicle they manufacture. $44,000 per vehicle they manufacture and sell. And that they're saying from here on into the future, any new models we introduce have to become profitable within the first year, or we're scrapping them. That spells disaster for the electric vehicle industry because they've never been able to make them profitable for a very simple and basic reason. And this is what Ford came out and said. It's the batteries. The batteries are so expensive. They're so expensive. And keep in mind too, they wouldn't even be considering building electric vehicles if it wasn't for the sheer amount of government handouts they're getting. The only way this process works is if the government literally continues to dump billions upon billions upon billions upon billions upon billions of dollars into it. Why? Because electric vehicles literally provide no value to the consumer. They provide no value to the taxpayer. You already can drive wherever you want to in a vehicle. Pull up to a pump, a gas station, a refilling center that are plentiful and easy to find. You don't need to map out your trip and figure out what gas stations you're going to stop at before you go on a road trip in an internal combustion engine, in a gas or diesel powered vehicle. You get into the vehicle and you drive. And when your E-light comes on, you just look up and say, when's the next exit? And you pull off and it takes you 5 minutes to fill up your tank, use the bathroom, maybe get some snacks, jump in the car and drive away. But for electric vehicles, that's not what they have to offer. And so remember, every single dollar of your taxpayer funds that are going into electric vehicles is simply going into try to make them as comparable as they possibly can to driving a gas vehicle. They're going to literally spend billions of dollars. And of course, we're far off from the technology and we're probably talking trillions eventually. Because you're going to have to upgrade the grids. You're going to have to build a lot of electric vehicle charging stations, a lot of research into battery technology. You're going to have to upfit and retrofit all these battery manufacturing plants you're building now that have old technology in them. So we're talking trillions because they've already spent probably $30 billion on electric vehicles and tax incentives and cash handouts. I mean, Ford alone, just for this plant they're building in Hardin County, got something like $3.5 billion in tax dollars just in that one plant. So it'll probably be trillions by the time we're done. But all just in order to emulate the functionality and the comfortability that comes with an internal combustion engine, a gas-powered vehicle. What value does that provide to the taxpayer? It's not like the vehicles, they're losing $44,000 a vehicle in order to price them at close to, if not more than, a gas-powered vehicle of the same type. And they have to lose $44,000. Meanwhile, they make several $1,000s on every gas-powered vehicle of the same type. So in actuality, without the tax incentives, without all that coming in, these vehicles are double the cost of gas vehicles. And once again, to do what? Drive had the same functionality and everything that we currently have. There is no value to the taxpayer there. And the fact that there is no value to the consumer and the fact that the government has to manufacture the market. And while we can reliably know that our government will spend our money, nothing is reliable when it comes to the government as far as whether or not they continue dumping billions of dollars into one industry, because it changes from administration to administration. Because it's all about who's at the top. But despite that, our legislature and our governor decided to go ahead and put over $500 million into a risky investment scheme, and it's a ticking time bomb for Bashir. Because remember Brady Industries for Bevan? That was what, 12, 15 million or so? I can't remember exactly, somewhere around there. This is over $500 million. This is more than like 40 times more money than Brady Industries was for Bevan. And we still talk about what a waste that was. Imagine how bad every single one, and deservingly so, of the legislators who orchestrated this deal, pushed this deal, and the Bashir administration, everybody put it together, should not have a political future when this blows up. They should not. They probably still will because, of course, as I said in our last segment, our voters just continue to reward failure by being like, well, you know, he seems like a good guy. But regardless, it's a ticking time bomb. Big problem and a perfect example of why we can't afford a tax cut. We need it. Because without a tax cut, without a spending cut, an actual spending cut, well, they'll be able to just continue these kinds of things. Now, despite the fact, this is funny though. So, you know, I've been consistent that I'm against the plan as laid out. I do want to reduce the income tax though. Overall, I'm just against the extended amount of spending. But Bashir, who's been against this like from the beginning. In fact, the last one or two or something, the last tax cut, I believe, in his veto message, he literally was like, I don't agree with this tax cut, but we'll go ahead and sign it anyways. He literally recorded a video about him saying that. Well, he's now celebrating the tax cut on Twitter. He made a post talking about how amazing he is for delivering this for Kentuckians and how he looks forward to working with them in the future. And it's just that duplicitousness, that two-facedness of like you literally hated on this plan the entire time. And now you're going to take credit for it. You know, I mean, if I was in that position where somehow I have hated on it, which I have, I'd make it very clear, while I will sign this because, you know, I want the reduction, we should be encouraging the legislators to make even greater cuts and make spending cuts because the plan has required a over 5% increase in net taxes to the Kentucky citizen. But he didn't say that. It's just all cookies and rainbows. Because he needs to take credit for the legislature's actions. So that is worth bringing up. I can look at both and say the same thing. Point out that he shouldn't be making those kinds of comments of acting like you've always been on board for this when you clearly weren't. So here's one more here. Tim Walz' son. This happened at the national level. Little thing I want to talk about. So Tim Walz' son is neurodivergent, some sort of autism. He's like non-vocal. And there is this touching moment at the DNC where he's 17, the son, he stood up and he was crying, saying, "That's my dad," and clapping for him. And you know, it's a touching, emotional moment. Obviously, the kid, you know, like I said, he's well neurodivergent, but that's it's still a touching moment, right? That's fine and dandy. And it's become interesting that, and yesterday when I recorded this, but didn't really record it, but recorded it, I had talked about this and mentioned that it'll really be a test to see, now, does that make Tim Walz a good dad? Possibly. And being a good dad doesn't mean you're necessarily a good legislator, right? The kind of policies you want that make a loving and fantastic home, you know, expanding those policies out into government equals communism and tyranny, because you're making decisions for everyone else. That's what you do in your home, right? As a father, you're making decisions for your kids. You're in large part, if you have I don't know how the gender roles are in your household, but in large part, a lot of the time, you're kind of setting the tone and also setting, the direction of the family as the father. If you're fulfilling the head of the household role, maybe in your household, the woman more runs that. Maybe you are more equal on that side of things. Just in our household, it's a little more on my shoulders there. And so, but that would make, like, if I treated government the same way I treated running my household, it would be, a theocratic fascist system. That's what it would be, because that's how it is in the household. You will do exactly what I want you to do. You will say what I want you to say. I don't care if you mean it or not. I'm talking about my kids here. You're going to take part in these actions, and hopefully you mean it. But even if you don't, it's discipline, and I'm asking you to go ahead and do these things anyways as your father. But so regardless, maybe he is a great father. I think the real test for whether or not he will be a good father, and I said this yesterday, was that whether or not he has recognized that this played well with the public, that his neurodivergent son plays well with the public, those touching moments. And so will they begin now to put this 17-year-old kid who's mentally challenged, I guess, has mental issues, nonverbal. Are they going to trot him out into a very stressful situation of taking him now on the campaign trail with them? He wasn't before, keep in mind, but they see how this plays, they see the headlines, so they go ahead and bring this kid out onto the trail with them. And if they do that, that tells you he is not a good father. That is somebody willing to literally use their own family members as props if they believe it will help them gain power. So I said that yesterday. Well, we've also had a new development on that front. There's a video circulating online of Tim Walz, and he's up on stage with his son, and he pulls his son over to him by the hand, kind of jerking him over, right? And while we've all had young kids, and obviously this child's 17, but, where he has those mental issues, he's probably got more of a mind of like a small kid. So while we all have had small kids, and we've kind of jerked them by the arm at times when there's danger or something. In this case, they're just kind of walking up on stage. I'm sure the kid was not doing something that he wanted him to do. He was probably walking in the wrong direction or not following him or getting easily distracted. And so he kind of pulled him over, which is, I don't want to say which is necessarily fine. It just kind of depends on what he was doing. Were you worried about his safety? Because like I said, I've quickly pulled my son towards me in safety situations where I'm worried about him walking into traffic. Obviously not as much anymore. He's 12. But when he was younger, walking into traffic, walking into danger. And as a parent, you're not trying to be nice in that moment. You're just trying to make sure your child's removed from danger. But it didn't look like the kid was in any danger. But more importantly, it was Tim Walz's face. He was very, very angry with the pool. It was an angry pool, kind of like you would, maybe a dog that is very misbehaved that you've taken for a walk and is trying to attack another dog, and you kind of angrily jerk them back away. It was that same angry face. So it shows a little bit of a crack there. And it shows that frustration there. And normally that wouldn't be something you'd point out so much or try to make a big deal out of. But the problem is that Tim Walz and the DNC, by bringing this kid into the spotlight and playing him up as they have, which they have, you're now opening up an extra amount of criticism on you and how you act with your children. So once again, it'll be interesting to see if they end up bringing Tim Walz's son along more. And if they do, that tells you right away he's not a very good dad. He's a dad that is simply trying to use his kids to achieve any kind of political points that he can score. Well, y'all, that's what we got time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We'll be back here on Monday. That's a video episode, so you can watch that on Twitter, Facebook, also, of course, where you're listening to this show at right now. But until then, we'll be seeing you.